It was an ordinary day, gray clouds hovering over the city, casting long shadows across the streets. For Lena, the 14-year-old sitting nervously in a packed courtroom, it was anything but ordinary. She had never imagined she'd be in court, let alone stand in front of a judge with her entire future hanging in the balance. She clutched her hands tightly, her knuckles turning white, her stomach growling faintly, though she tried her best to hide it. It had been a long time since breakfast, if she could even call it that. A single slice of bread and a bit of peanut butter was all they'd had left, and with 3 younger siblings to think about, Lena had decided to save it for them. The courtroom was bustling with murmurs and the soft shuffle of feet as people waited for their names to be called. Most of them hadn't even noticed her, a young black girl in a worn-out hoodie sitting near the back, eyes cast down to the floor. The judge was a middle-aged man named Judge Harris, a well-respected figure known throughout the city. He was known for his stern but fair judgments, and people either respected him or feared him. Lena wasn't sure what to feel. She was just scared, plain and simple. She felt like a small fish in a very big, very cold pond. The charges against her were minor. A petty theft incident from a convenience store. She tried to walk out with a few small food items, a couple of granola bars, an apple, a carton of milk. It wasn't much, but it was enough to bring her here, facing judgment. Lena's mother, Maya, was unable to join her today. She was working her second shift at the factory, hoping to make enough for rent, bills, and whatever food she could stretch for the week. Maya had raised her children alone since her husband had left years ago. She worked long hours, and even though she tried her best, there were days, like today, when they just didn't have enough. Lena understood her mom's struggle. It was why she had taken it upon herself to help in any way she could. But as she stood here, facing the consequences of her actions, she wondered if her decision had been worth it. The courtroom felt colder by the second as she was finally called forward. Her heart pounded, her feet feeling like lead as she approached the bench. Judge Harris looked down at her, his stern gaze softening for just a moment when he took in her young face. There was a hint of curiosity in his eyes, as though he was trying to understand what brought a girl like her into his courtroom. "Miss Carter," he began, his voice echoing in the silence, "do you understand why you're here today?" Lena nodded slowly, swallowing hard as she found her voice. "Yes, sir." The judge asked her a few basic questions, establishing the facts of the case. He read aloud the report, describing how Lena had attempted to steal food. As he read, Lena's cheeks burned with shame. She knew what she did was wrong, but the words felt heavier when spoken in this grand, imposing room. She wanted to disappear, to sink into the ground and escape the weight of the stares directed at her. Then, as Judge Harris paused, Lena's stomach let out a low, audible growl. It was loud enough to draw some surprised glances, and Lena's face flushed red with embarrassment. The judge looked down at her, frowning slightly. "Miss Carter," he said, "did you have breakfast this morning?" Lena hesitated, shifting her weight. She glanced up at him, her lips parting as if to say something, but then she looked back down, her voice barely above a whisper. "No, sir," she admitted. "We didn't have anything left." Her voice wavered, a mixture of shame and fear. A murmur rippled through the courtroom, and Judge Harris leaned back, his expression shifting from the detached professionalism of a judge to something softer, something almost fatherly. He set down the report, folding his hands as he regarded her in silence for a moment. His gaze was intense, piercing, as though he was seeing straight into her life, her struggles, the things she had been too proud to share. "And you took the food because you were hungry?" he asked, his tone gentle but probing. Lena nodded, her eyes welling up with tears she tried to hold back. She didn't want to cry here, didn't want to look weak. But the weight of everything, of her mother's endless work, her siblings' hungry faces, her own guilt, pressed down on her, and she couldn't stop a single tear from slipping down her cheek. I didn't want to," she said, her voice breaking. "I just didn't know what else to do." For a moment, The judge was silent, as if absorbing the gravity of her words. Then, something unexpected happened. Judge Harris leaned forward, his expression softening even further. "Lena," he said quietly, breaking the formal tone. "How often do you and your family go without food?" Her gaze lifted, surprised by his question. She wasn't sure if she should answer, but his eyes held an unspoken encouragement. "Some weeks. A lot," she admitted. "When my mom's hours get cut, or there's an extra bill. It's hard sometimes." The courtroom was silent. People shifted uncomfortably, some looking away, others watching Lena with newfound sympathy. Judge Harris tapped his fingers on the desk, his gaze unwavering as he seemed to make a decision. Then, instead of moving to sentencing, he did something no one in the room expected. He announced a recess. Lena looked around, confused. She didn't understand what was happening, but when she looked back up at the judge, he gave her a faint, reassuring nod. "Wait here," he instructed, and he left the bench. People in the audience began whispering, wondering what he was doing. Some of them leaned in, whispering in shock or admiration, others in confusion. Within minutes, Judge Harris returned, carrying a brown bag with food. He walked down from the bench and handed it to her himself. "Here," he said. "It's not much, but it should get you through the morning." Lena took the bag, her hands shaking, and she blinked, speechless. She opened her mouth to thank him, but her words got caught in her throat. It was the last thing she'd expected, and she could barely believe what was happening. A judge, this stern, feared man, showing such kindness. The room was silent, all eyes on them, as if everyone were witnessing something far beyond a simple court case. As Lena held the bag, a mixture of relief and gratitude flooded over her. This simple act, this small gesture, had broken down the walls she'd built around her heart, the walls she put up to shield herself from judgment, from pity. And in that moment, Judge Harris wasn't just a figure of authority. He was a man who'd seen her suffering and chosen to help in whatever way he could. With that, the judge returned to his bench, resuming his position with his usual calm authority. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as people processed what had just happened. As Lena sat there clutching the brown paper bag in her hands, the weight of the room pressed down on her again, but this time it felt different. She was no longer just the frightened teenager at the mercy of the law. People's eyes were on her, but now she felt less like a criminal and more like someone they were actually seeing, truly noticing for the first time. The judge's simple act of kindness lingered in the air, a quiet reminder that compassion still had a place, even in a cold, somber courtroom. Judge Harris adjusted his glasses, returning to the bench with his usual composure, but there was something unspoken, a gentler edge to his voice, now as he resumed the proceedings. He cleared his throat, looking at Lena, his expression a mixture of sternness and empathy. "Lena," he began, "theft is a serious matter, no matter the circumstances. The law doesn't allow us to take what isn't ours, even if it's something as essential as food." Lena's gaze fell to the floor, her cheeks burning again. She gripped the edge of her chair, bracing herself for the punishment he might give, half expecting the sympathy he'd shown a moment ago to disappear as quickly as it had appeared. But Judge Harris continued, his tone softening. "However, I also recognize that there are situations where desperation can lead good people to make difficult choices." He paused, looking down at the papers before him as if weighing his next words. Then, unexpectedly, he looked up, his gaze sweeping across the room. "I want everyone in this courtroom to take a moment and consider what it might feel like to be in her shoes. Imagine being 14, taking care of younger siblings, knowing that even one meal is never guaranteed." His words struck a nerve, and murmurs swept through the audience. A few people shifted in their seats, uncomfortable yet captivated, forced to confront the reality of the struggle Lena had just described. The judge continued, "Theft is not the answer, but sometimes poverty can feel like a cage with no way out. I hope everyone here understands the gravity of what this young girl faces daily." He looked back down at Lena, his gaze warm but resolute. "Now, Lena," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "I need you to understand that actions have consequences. If you find yourself in such a difficult position again, please find another way. Reach out to someone. There are people who care, people who want to help." Lena nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. She felt overwhelmed, emotions swirling inside her. Embarrassment, gratitude, fear, and somewhere deep down, a glimmer of hope that maybe her life wasn't destined to always feel this hard, this empty. Judge Harris leaned back, glancing at the prosecutor, who looked taken aback by the turn of events but nodded in silent agreement. It was clear that something unspoken had passed between them, a mutual understanding of how extraordinary the situation was. The judge adjusted his glasses again and took a deep breath, addressing Lena directly. "For this offense, Lena, I am not going to pursue the usual course of action. Instead, I am assigning you to community service, 40 hours, to be exact, at the local food bank." He looked around the courtroom, his eyes moving over the faces of the spectators, as though he was addressing the entire city. "I want you to understand, Lena, that there are ways to get help, and I want you to be in a place where you see that firsthand. You'll be helping those in similar situations, understanding that hunger and poverty are burdens that many share." Lena nodded, relief flooding over her like a warm wave. She hadn't expected this outcome, and she could barely believe it. She braced herself for the worst, for harsh punishment, for a judgment that might haunt her forever. Instead, she'd been handed something she could handle, something that felt fair. And not only that, it was something that would allow her to help her own family in the process. She couldn't stop herself from glancing back at her seat, where the brown bag of food still sat, a small but powerful symbol of the mercy she'd been shown. Just as she was about to turn back to the judge, a woman in the audience spoke up, her voice carrying through the silence. "Judge, if I may." The woman's name was Margaret Olson, a local business owner and philanthropist known in the community for her outspoken personality and her relentless advocacy for social issues. Judge Harris raised an eyebrow, gesturing for her to speak. Margaret stood, facing Lena with a warm smile, then turned her gaze back to the judge. "I'd like to help too. If Lena and her family are struggling this much, maybe we, as a community, can do more than just pass judgment. Perhaps I could offer Lena a part-time job at my store, help her earn a little extra to take home." The room erupted in murmurs once again. This was completely unexpected, an outsider stepping forward to offer a helping hand in the middle of a court case. Lena looked at Margaret, eyes wide with surprise. She hadn't thought anyone would take such an interest in her situation. Judge Harris considered Margaret's offer carefully, a thoughtful look crossing his face. He glanced at Lena, then nodded. "If Lena's mother agrees, I think that could be a very constructive arrangement." Lena's heart pounded in her chest. The feeling of relief was now mixed with something else. Hope, perhaps, or maybe just a sense of gratitude that she hadn't felt in a long time. Margaret stepped forward and handed Lena a small card, her voice kind and encouraging. "Come by tomorrow, all right? I could use a hard worker like you around." Lena took the card, her hand trembling slightly, her eyes brimming with tears of gratitude. The kindness she'd been shown by strangers in this room, people who knew nothing of her life or her struggles, felt like a lifeline, something that could lift her and her family out of the darkness, if only a little bit. The judge cleared his throat, bringing the courtroom back to order. He looked at Lena one last time, his expression stern but softened by a touch of compassion. "Lena, I hope you understand that today you were given a second chance. I want you to make the most of it. You're young, and you have a lot of potential. Don't let one difficult choice define you." As the proceedings wrapped up, Lena felt a strange lightness inside her, as though a burden she hadn't even realized she was carrying had been lifted. She'd come here expecting punishment, judgment, maybe even hopelessness. But instead, she was leaving with a second chance, an opportunity to help others, and even the possibility of a steady income for her family. She clutched the card in her hand like a lifeline, her mind racing with thoughts of how things might finally begin to change for her and her siblings. As she stepped out of the courtroom, people glanced her way, their expressions ranging from supportive to skeptical. But for once, Lena didn't care about what they thought. She held her head a little higher, her steps a little more assured. She knew she had been given something precious today, an opportunity to prove herself, to rise above her circumstances. Margaret caught up with her just outside the courthouse, giving her a small, encouraging smile. "Don't be late tomorrow," she said, a twinkle in her eye, "and bring that big heart of yours. We need people who care." As Lena walked away, her heart pounded with a mix of fear and excitement. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time, she felt that the world was not entirely against her. And as she walked home, she felt that maybe, just maybe, she could make it through. The following morning, Lena woke up before dawn, her heart beating a little faster than usual. She'd barely slept, her mind swirling with thoughts about her meeting with Margaret. She was anxious yet hopeful, imagining what it might be like to finally have a job, to bring home a little extra money, to help her mother in a way that didn't involve risking her future. She dressed carefully, pulling on her cleanest clothes, and made sure her little siblings were set with breakfast before she left. Her mother, who had come home late from a double shift, was already up, though bleary-eyed and clearly exhausted. Lena hesitated in the doorway, looking at her mom. "I'm going to the job Mrs. Olson offered," she said softly. Her mother looked at her, surprise flickering across her tired face. She reached out, resting a hand on Lena's shoulder. "I'm proud of you," she murmured, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Those words stayed with Lena, giving her strength as she walked through the chilly morning streets toward Margaret's store. When she arrived, Margaret was waiting for her outside, bundled up in a thick coat. She smiled warmly when she saw Lena approach, a reassuring kindness in her eyes that immediately put Lena at ease. "Ready to get started?" Margaret asked, her voice bright and cheerful. Lena nodded, swallowing her nerves. "Yes, Mom. Thank you again for giving me this chance." Margaret waved a hand dismissively. "Everyone deserves a helping hand now and then. Let's get you inside and show you around." The store was a small, cozy place filled with handcrafted goods, organic produce, and a little cafe in the corner. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and baked goods filled the air, making Lena's stomach rumble despite herself. She tried to hide it, but Margaret noticed and chuckled softly. "Go ahead and grab something from the counter. We always start the morning with a warm muffin and some coffee." She handed Lena a blueberry muffin, watching as the young girl's face lit up with surprise and gratitude. After a quick breakfast, Margaret led Lena through the tasks of the day. She showed her how to work the register, how to stock shelves, and how to keep things tidy. Lena learned quickly, throwing herself into the work with a determination that surprised even Margaret. By the end of the day, Lena had memorized the layout of the store and was even beginning to recognize a few of the regular customers who had come in to shop or grab a coffee. That evening, Margaret pulled Lena aside as they were closing up. She handed her a small envelope, a warm smile on her face. "Here's your pay for today, Lena. You did a great job." Lena took the envelope, her fingers trembling slightly as she looked inside. It wasn't a huge amount, but to her, it felt like a fortune. She thanked Margaret, her voice barely above a whisper, overwhelmed by the kindness and generosity she'd been shown. As Lena walked home, her spirits lifted, her heart lighter than it had been in a long time. She held the envelope tightly, already planning how she would use the money to help her mother and siblings. Maybe she could buy some extra groceries, or even something special for her siblings to brighten their day. For once, she felt a sense of control over her life, a small but significant step toward something better. But life had its own plans, and just when Lena thought things were starting to look up, another challenge arose. The following week, while Lena was at school, her mother collapsed at work, exhausted from the relentless hours and strain of supporting 4 children on her own. Lena got the news during her lunch break, a teacher pulling her aside to gently break it to her. The words hit her like a physical blow, her heart pounding as fear clawed its way up her throat. She rushed to the hospital, where her mother lay in a small, sterile room, her face pale and drawn. The doctors explained that Maya needed rest, real, sustained rest, and that continuing her grueling work schedule could lead to far more serious health issues. Lina's mind spun, the weight of responsibility settling heavily on her shoulders. She knew that if her mom couldn't work, they would lose what little stability they had. The rent was due soon, and there were bills piling up, more than she could ever manage on her own. Panic tightened her chest, but she took a deep breath, willing herself to stay strong. After speaking with the doctors, she made her way to the waiting area, where Margaret was waiting for her. She had come as soon as she'd heard, and she sat down beside Lina, her face etched with worry and sympathy. "How's your mother doing, Lina?" she asked softly. Lina fought back tears, swallowing the lump in her throat. She's exhausted. They're saying she can't keep working like this, but I don't know how we're going to manage without her income." The words tumbled out, raw and vulnerable, the fear in her voice unmistakable. Margaret placed a comforting hand on Lina's shoulder. "I'll help you however I can," she said firmly. "But there's more to this than just making ends meet. This is about making sure your family has a future, and that starts with getting some support for your mother." She explained that she knew of some community programs that could help with their rent and other expenses in the short term. Margaret even offered to speak with some friends in the local business community to see if they could raise some funds to help with the immediate crisis. In the following days, Margaret followed through on her promises, rallying the community around Lina and her family in a way Lina never expected. Donations came in, small and large, from people she had never met. Neighbors, business owners, even customers from the store. Some people left bags of groceries on their doorstep, while others contributed money to help cover rent and medical bills. The outpouring of support left Lina both stunned and deeply grateful. For the first time, she realized that she and her family weren't as alone as she had always thought. But just when things seemed to be turning around, another unexpected twist arrived. One morning, Lina was called back to court, this time not because she was in trouble, but because Judge Harris had requested to see her. She felt a pang of anxiety as she entered the familiar courtroom, wondering what this was about. When she arrived, Judge Harris was waiting, his expression serious but not unkind. "Lina," he began, "I asked you here today because I wanted to follow up on your progress." He paused, glancing at the papers on his desk before looking back at her. "I've heard that you've been working at Mrs. Olson's store and doing very well. But I also understand that your family is going through a difficult time with your mother's health." Lina nodded, her hands clenched tightly at her sides. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she held her breath, hoping for the best. Judge Harris leaned forward, his gaze piercing but compassionate. "Your resilience has impressed me, Lina. You've been given a challenging hand, yet you've stepped up in ways most people twice your age couldn't manage. Because of this, I want to offer you an additional opportunity." He explained that there was a special youth mentorship program he oversaw, one designed to provide both educational support and financial assistance to young people facing difficult circumstances. Through this program, Lina would receive a small monthly stipend, access to tutoring, and even the chance to apply for scholarships to help her further her education. Lina's eyes widened, disbelief mingling with hope. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. This program could change everything. It could give her the chance to not only help her family now, but to build a future for herself. A real future. She looked at Judge Harris, her voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you. I don't know what to say." Judge Harris gave her a gentle smile. "Just keep doing what you're doing, Lina. Keep moving forward, and never forget that there are people who believe in you." He nodded toward Margaret, who had come to the hearing to support her. And Lina felt a surge of gratitude so strong it nearly brought her to tears. As she left the courtroom, Lina felt a strange new sensation blooming within her, a sense of possibility, of hope that things could truly change for the better. She knew the road ahead would still be difficult, but for the first time in a long time, she felt as though she had a chance to carve out a different life for herself and her family. She had been given not only a second chance but the support of a community, and she was determined to make the most of it. Lena's life began to shift in ways she never could have imagined. With the support of Margaret's mentorship, her job at the store, and the guidance from Judge Harris's youth mentorship program, Lena found herself steadily growing into a young woman capable of navigating her circumstances with newfound strength. Her family, still struggling but now surrounded by the generosity of the community, saw glimpses of stability they hadn't known in years. There was food on the table, their bills were partially covered, and her mother was finally resting and regaining her strength. Lena, at 14, was stepping into shoes much larger than her age, and it was clear that she was now a beacon of resilience for her family. The mentorship program from Judge Harris was a remarkable experience for Lena. Twice a week, she'd attend sessions in the program's small office, a space buzzing with young people like herself, each carrying stories of hardship, hope, and determination. The program paired her with a mentor, Mr. Jordan, a retired teacher who had devoted his life to helping underprivileged youth. Mr. Jordan was patient, gentle but firm, with an old-school approach to discipline and an infectious belief in the potential of his students. He'd push her to do her homework, teach her about budgeting, and occasionally sneak her a few books on topics he thought would spark her curiosity. Lena found herself diving into these sessions, discovering a love for reading and an ambition for something she hadn't dared to dream of before: college. One evening, as she finished stacking produce at the store, Margaret joined her, carrying a small binder. She handed it to Lena with a smile. "I thought you'd be interested in this," she said warmly. Lena opened the binder to find information about scholarships and local university programs, things she'd never thought she'd consider. The thought of college had always felt so far out of reach, a dream that didn't belong to people like her, who were focused on surviving the present rather than building the future. But now, with the binder in her hands, she felt the weight of possibility. The path was long and steep, but she was beginning to believe that with the right support, she might actually be able to climb it. Margaret and Mr. Jordan weren't the only ones who noticed Lena's progress. Word spread through the community about her dedication, her hard work, and the challenges she was facing head-on. People admired her courage, but, as often happens, not everyone was supportive. Some folks questioned why so much attention was given to one young girl when so many others were struggling. Rumors began circulating that Judge Harris was showing favoritism and that Margaret was giving preferential treatment. A few people voiced their opinions publicly, questioning the fairness of the aid Lena's family was receiving. One evening, as she was walking home from work, Lena overheard a group of people whispering her name. They didn't see her, but their words cut deep. "She's just a kid," one man muttered. "Why is the whole town bending over backward to help her when there are other families just as needy?" Another voice, a woman's, chimed in. "Exactly. My cousin has been struggling for years, and no one's ever offered her a scholarship program or a job at Margaret's store." Lena paused, feeling her stomach twist. She'd never wanted to be a source of controversy, and the realization that others resented the help she was receiving made her feel small and ashamed. She walked the rest of the way home with her head down, trying to make sense of it. That night, she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind spinning with doubts. Had she done something wrong by accepting help? Did she deserve all of this, or was she somehow taking from others who might need it just as much? The next day, Lena brought up her concerns with Mr. Jordan during their session. She hesitated at first, unsure of how to express the tangled feelings inside her. But Mr. Jordan listened, his expression understanding, nodding slowly as she talked. "It's hard, Lena," he said gently when she finished. "Sometimes, when you rise above your circumstances, people will be supportive. But others, well, others may feel resentful or envious. It's human nature, unfortunately. They see you being lifted up and feel it as a reminder of what they lack. He looked at her kindly, a sad wisdom in his eyes. "But you've worked for everything you've been given, Lena. None of this was just handed to you without effort or struggle. You've earned every bit of this support." She nodded, feeling the knot in her chest loosen a bit. Mr. Jordan's words gave her comfort, but the comments she'd overheard still lingered in her mind. She decided to channel that discomfort into something positive, a way of showing the community that she wasn't just a passive recipient of their generosity, but someone who intended to pay it forward. The next day, Lena approached Margaret with an idea. "I want to start a small food drive," she said, her voice filled with quiet determination. "Just something to help other families who might be struggling, like we were. Maybe I can get some people in the community involved." Margaret's eyes lit up, a proud smile spreading across her face. "That's a wonderful idea, Lena," she said, nodding approvingly. "And I'll help in any way I can." With Margaret's help, Lena spent the next week planning the food drive. They put up posters around the neighborhood, spread the word through local community groups, and reached out to nearby businesses to contribute. At first, she worried that no one would show up, or that people might see her efforts as a shallow attempt to give back. But on the day of the food drive, the turnout exceeded her wildest expectations. Dozens of people came, families who were struggling, older residents who wanted to support her. Even a few of those who had voiced their criticism showed up, perhaps curious to see if her efforts were genuine. The food drive was a success, and by the end of the day, they'd collected enough food to help more than a dozen families in need. As Lena packed up the last of the donated items, she felt a deep sense of accomplishment, a warmth that came from knowing she'd made a real difference. She had faced her doubts, taken the criticism to heart, and used it to fuel something positive for her community. She looked around at the people who had helped, and they looked back with admiration and gratitude. It was clear that any lingering doubts about her intentions had faded away, replaced by a sense of respect for her commitment. Later that evening, Judge Harris heard about the food drive and personally congratulated Lena on her initiative. "You've proven something very important today, Lena," he said, his voice filled with pride. "You've shown that you're not just someone who accepts help, but someone who gives it. That's a rare quality, and it's one that will carry you far in life." Lena left his office that day with her head held high, feeling stronger and more confident than ever. Her mother, who had been recovering steadily, looked at Lena with a sense of pride that brought tears to her eyes. "You're becoming a young woman I admire, Lena," she said softly. "You're showing everyone what it means to overcome." The sense of unity in the community grew stronger after that day. People began to view Lena as more than just a recipient of aid. They saw her as a part of their own story, someone who reflected the resilience and compassion that defined their town. And with each passing day, Lena felt the weight of her past begin to lift, replaced by a steady sense of purpose. She knew there would be more challenges ahead, but now she felt ready to face them. Her family was healing, her community had rallied around her, and she was finally beginning to see a future that held something brighter, something better than she'd ever dared to dream. As the weeks turned into months, Lena's life continued to transform in ways she hadn't expected. Her job at Margaret's store became more than just work. It was a place where she felt a part of something, where she contributed meaningfully, and saw the value of her efforts reflected back in the smiles and gratitude of customers. Margaret had become more than an employer. She was a mentor, a guide, and even a bit of a mother figure, filling gaps in Lena's life that she hadn't realized were so empty. At school, too, Lena noticed changes. Teachers who had once seemed indifferent now stopped her in the halls to offer words of encouragement, noticing the improvements in her grades and her newfound dedication. She spent her lunch breaks at the mentorship program, where Mr. Jordan pushed her further academically than she thought possible. He taught her study techniques, helped her with tough assignments, and even encouraged her to consider applying for advanced classes next year. For the first time, Lena could envision a path beyond high school. She started dreaming of college, imagining herself as someone who could one day have a career, maybe even a future that would lift her entire family out of the cycle of poverty. The mentorship program introduced Lena to other students with stories not so different from her own, kids who had faced struggles but who were equally determined to build something better for themselves. Among them, she made friends who understood her in ways no one else had before. They shared stories of hardship and hope, creating a support system that extended beyond the program and into their everyday lives. They encouraged one another, pushing each other to dream bigger, to work harder, to believe that they could achieve more than the world expected of them. But amidst all these positive changes, Lena still faced challenges, especially with her family. Her mother's health was improving, but not without setbacks. Some weeks were better than others, and Lena took on even more responsibilities at home, caring for her siblings, helping them with homework, and doing her best to fill the role of caretaker while her mother continued to recover. The weight of it all sometimes felt overwhelming, but Lena carried on, fueled by the knowledge that each step she took brought her family closer to stability. She reminded herself constantly that this was temporary, that things were improving, that they were on a path towards something better. One evening, as she was cleaning up at the store, Margaret approached her, looking thoughtful. "Lena," she began, "I've been talking with some people in the community. We've all been so impressed by what you've done, not just for yourself, but for others. We'd like to organize something special, a scholarship fund in your name. This would be a fund to help kids just like you who are trying to overcome tough circumstances." Lena stared at her, stunned. She could barely process the idea that her name could be attached to something as powerful as a scholarship fund. "Why? Why would you do that?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Margaret smiled, her eyes warm with pride. "Because you've proven that you're not just someone who needs help, Lena. You're someone who inspires others to do better, to be better. And if we can honor that by creating a legacy that helps others, well, that's something worth doing." Overwhelmed, Lena could only nod, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. This was more than she had ever dreamed of, not just a chance for herself, but a way to give others hope. She thought back to all the nights she had lain awake, wondering if life would ever get better, if she'd ever escape the cycle of poverty that seemed to define her family. And now, here was a chance not only to change her own life, but to help others change theirs as well. The news of the scholarship fund spread quickly, sparking excitement and admiration across the community. It was a rare thing, they said, for someone so young to inspire such generosity, to be a part of something so meaningful. Lena's story became a beacon of hope, not just for those in poverty, but for anyone facing hardship, a reminder that resilience and hard work could transform lives. The scholarship fund grew rapidly, with donations pouring in from people all over town and even from nearby communities. Local businesses pledged support, and soon the fund was large enough to help several students each year, ensuring that Lena's story would continue to inspire others for years to come. But as with all things, there were still moments of doubt and criticism. Not everyone supported the idea of a scholarship fund in Lena's name. Some people questioned why a teenager should be the face of such an initiative. Others claimed that the town was putting too much focus on one person's story, that Lena was being placed on a pedestal. Lena heard these whispers now and then, catching glimpses of disapproving looks or hearing passing comments that questioned her worthiness. It hurt, of course, but she reminded herself of what Mr. Jordan had told her months ago, that with growth and success would come both support and envy, and that her job was to stay true to her purpose, regardless of what others thought. Judge Harris, who had quietly followed Lena's journey from the beginning, invited her back to his office one afternoon. She walked in, a little nervous, not sure what to expect. The judge sat behind his desk, a proud yet solemn look on his face. "Lena," he said, motioning for her to sit down, "I want you to understand just how far you've come. The journey you've been on has been extraordinary, and it's a testament to your character. But remember, the path you're on is not always easy. People will look up to you, yes, but others may try to bring you down. It's a strange thing, success. It attracts support and opposition in equal measure. Lena nodded, taking his words to heart. She'd already begun to see this duality in her life, and while it was confusing at times, she understood that her purpose was greater than the opinions of a few detractors. The judge handed her a small, ornate book, its cover worn but beautifully embossed with gold letters. "This was my mother's journal," he said, a touch of nostalgia in his voice. She was one of the first black women to practice law in this city. Her journey wasn't easy, and she faced opposition at every turn. "I want you to have this, to remind you that resilience is a part of our legacy. You're walking a path that others have walked before, and they endured so that you, and others like you, could have a chance at a better future." With the journal in hand, Lena felt a deep sense of gratitude and responsibility. She thanked Judge Harris, promising to honor the legacy of resilience that he had entrusted to her. She began reading the journal that night, finding strength in the words of a woman who had faced obstacles and overcome them, paving the way for future generations. Lena saw herself in those pages, a young woman fighting to rise above her circumstances, determined to make a mark on the world. As the scholarship fund grew, Lena continued her work, both at the store and in her studies. She applied for scholarships, was accepted into advanced courses, and even began to consider a future in law, inspired by Judge Harris and the legacy of his mother. She dreamed of one day standing in his shoes, helping others who had once been where she was, struggling but determined to rise. The scholarship fund became a cornerstone of the community, a testament to the strength that could be found in even the most challenging of circumstances. Years later, Lena would reflect on those days with gratitude and pride. She would go on to achieve more than she had ever imagined possible, her story a lasting reminder to those who knew her that hardship didn't have to define one's future. Through resilience, determination, and the support of a compassionate community, Lena had transformed her life, and in doing so, had left a legacy that would inspire generations to come. She carried forward the lessons she'd learned, honoring the people who had helped her along the way and ensuring that the doors that had once been closed to her were open for others. And as she looked back on her journey, Lena understood that success wasn't just about personal achievement. It was about lifting others, paying forward the kindness she had received, and being the change she wished to see. The girl who had once stood in a courtroom, frightened and hungry, was now a woman of influence and integrity, forever grateful for the second chance that had changed everything. Years had passed, and Lena's journey continued to unfold in ways that went far beyond her original hopes. Now a young woman, she had become a pillar of her community, her story a constant reminder of resilience, courage, and the power of compassion. The scholarship fund established in her name had grown into a full-fledged foundation, one that provided educational support, mentorship, and basic needs assistance for struggling families in the area. The Lena Carter Foundation was a beacon of hope for countless families, a symbol of what could be achieved when a community came together to lift each other up. Lena had recently graduated from law school, a goal that had once felt like an unreachable dream. She stood at the commencement ceremony, looking out at the audience, knowing that among them were her family, Margaret, Mr. Jordan, and Judge Harris, all of whom had been her mentors and guides along the way. When she stepped up to the podium to deliver her graduation speech, her voice was filled with a confidence that was hard-won, built over years of overcoming obstacles that had once seemed insurmountable. She spoke of her gratitude, her hardships, and the strength she had gained through the love and support of her community. She ended with a promise to use her education, her voice, and her position to continue helping those who, like her, had faced daunting odds. After graduation, Lena returned home, her heart set on serving her community as an attorney. Her work was intense, often emotionally taxing, as she took on cases that others avoided. She represented people in poverty, single mothers, and struggling teenagers who reminded her of her younger self. She fought for those who felt voiceless, standing up against injustices that were often hidden from the public eye. Her reputation grew quickly, not only for her skill and dedication, but for her relentless commitment to fairness and her refusal to turn her back on those who needed her most. In every case, she saw a piece of her past, a reminder of why she had chosen this path in the first place. One day, Lena received a case that hit close to home. A young boy, Jamal, barely 13, had been caught stealing from a local grocery store. The details of his case mirrored her own past so closely that it left her momentarily speechless when she read through the file. Like Lena, Jamal had been trying to provide for his younger siblings. His mother, overwhelmed and struggling with her health, couldn't make ends meet. He had taken a few basic items, bread, milk, and some fruit, but the act had led to his arrest and a court date that would decide his future. When she met Jamal in her office, she saw the same frightened, guarded look in his eyes that she had once worn. She softened her voice, speaking to him not as an attorney but as someone who understood exactly what he was going through. "I know it feels like the world is against you right now," she said gently. "But I promise you, it doesn't have to stay that way. We're going to get through this together." She saw his shoulders relax slightly, a glimmer of hope beginning to form in his expression. For the first time in a long time, Lena felt as if she were looking at a younger version of herself, a child on the edge of a path that could lead either to ruin or redemption. As Lena prepared his case, she poured everything she had into it, determined to ensure that Jamal would get the same second chance he had once been given. She presented his case with skill and empathy, drawing on her own experience to remind the judge and jury of the importance of understanding, of seeing beyond the surface to the challenges that poverty and hardship placed on children like Jamal. Her words were powerful, filled with the conviction of someone who had lived through the very struggle she was describing. She argued not only for leniency but for support, advocating for a community-based program that would allow Jamal to rebuild his life without the burden of a criminal record. The court listened intently, and when the verdict came, Lena felt a surge of relief. The judge ruled in Jamal's favor, offering him a chance to enter a mentorship program rather than facing punishment. After the hearing, Jamal's mother approached Lena, tears in her eyes, as she expressed her gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You've given my son a chance at a life I thought was slipping away." Lena's heart swelled with pride, but she knew this was more than just a victory in the courtroom. It was a fulfillment of the promise she had made years ago, to help others find the hope and support she had once needed so desperately. Over time, Lena's foundation expanded its reach. She partnered with local schools, offering scholarships, mentorship, and tutoring programs for at-risk youth. She established workshops that taught financial literacy, job skills, and mental health support, addressing the root causes of the struggles that had once defined her life. Her efforts created a ripple effect throughout the community, inspiring other local leaders and businesses to contribute, to get involved, to recognize that poverty was not a failure of character, but a condition that could be changed through collective action. Judge Harris, now retired, watched her progress from afar, attending community events and offering quiet support whenever he could. On her 31st birthday, he surprised her with a letter, handwritten in his elegant script. In it, he spoke of his pride in her, of how he had always known that she was destined to make a difference. He reminded her of the journal he had given her years ago, the one belonging to his mother, and how her story had always reminded him of the importance of perseverance and purpose. "The world needs more people like you, Lena," he wrote. "People who see hardship and use it as fuel to create something beautiful, something lasting. I'm honored to have been a part of your journey." As Lena read the letter, tears filled her eyes. She thought back to that first day in court, when she had stood before him, frightened and ashamed, unable to see the future he had seen in her. She realized that her life had come full circle. Judge Harris had given her the gift of a second chance, and she had spent every day since trying to pay it forward, to create a legacy of compassion and justice that would continue long after she was gone. One summer evening, the community gathered for an annual event hosted by the Lena Carter Foundation. People filled the town square, sharing stories, laughter, and memories of how the foundation had touched their lives. Margaret was there, still running her store, still as vibrant and encouraging as ever. Mr. Jordan, retired from the mentorship program, but as sharp and insightful as he had always been, chatted with the young people he had once mentored. Lena's mother stood proudly beside her, her health now stable, her face filled with the quiet pride of a woman who had seen her daughter achieve more than she had ever dared to dream. As Lena took the stage to address the crowd, she felt a wave of emotion wash over her. She looked out at the faces of people whose lives she had touched and whose support had, in turn, lifted her. She spoke of her journey, of the importance of community, of how every act of kindness, no matter how small, had the power to change lives. She encouraged them to keep lifting each other up, to continue building a future where everyone had a fair chance, where no one was left behind. Lena ended her speech with a story about Jamal, about how he had recently graduated high school and was planning to attend college on a scholarship provided by her foundation. "He's just one of many," she said, her voice filled with pride. "One of many who will go on to do great things, to give back, to keep this cycle of compassion alive." She looked out at the crowd, her heart full, knowing that her life had come to embody something larger than herself. As the event drew to a close, people came up to Lena, sharing their gratitude, their admiration, their stories. A young girl, barely 10 years old, approached her, looking up with wide eyes. "I want to be like you when I grow up," she said shyly, clutching a small notebook. Lena knelt down, her heart swelling as she looked into the girl's hopeful eyes. "You can be anything you want to be," she said, her voice warm and encouraging. "Just remember to never give up, no matter how hard things get. And when you get the chance, help others too. That's the real secret." As the girl nodded eagerly, clutching her notebook to her chest, Lena felt a deep sense of peace. Her life had been a journey from struggle to strength, from despair to hope. And though it hadn't been easy, every hardship, every obstacle had led her here, to this moment, where she could inspire others to believe in themselves, to keep going, to reach for a better future. In the end, Lena knew that her story was just one thread in a vast tapestry of lives intertwined by acts of kindness and resilience. She had turned her pain into purpose, her fear into strength, and her struggles into a legacy that would endure long after her own journey had ended. As she looked out at the crowd, at the faces of the people she had touched, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She was home, surrounded by love, by hope, by a community that had once lifted her up and now looked to her as a leader, a friend, and a beacon of light in a world that so often seemed dark. And as the evening faded into night, Lena knew that her journey was far from over. There were more people to help, more lives to touch, and a legacy of compassion to nurture. But for now she stood there, grounded in the knowledge that she had come full circle, that she had not only found,